A BuildHer developed production.
Hello, I'm Aaron Kyle and welcome to another episode of BuildHer. On this week's episode of BuildHer, I had the opportunity to sit down with Rebeka and Kribashini from BuildHer Collective. These ladies are doing wonderful things in the construction and property space for women, and I don't even need to say that they are promoting women in the industry, because through BuildHer Collective, they are certainly leading the charge by building incredible projects and even better spaces. This was a really nice, genuine chat, and we covered a lot of ground talking about clients, architects, and even the property developer's responsibility in the project. Like I said, we covered a lot of ground, and this week was just a really nice, honest, and open conversation about all people involved in construction and property development in general. So let's get into it. Kribashini and Rebeka from BuildHer Collective, welcome to BuildHer.
Thank you for having us. We're super excited to be here.
This will be a good one. So this is a bit of a combined collaborative joint effort, more of a personal sit down and conversation. So I'm really looking forward to it. Now, as always, we always like to start with our guest background and take it all the way back. Before we do that, tell us a bit about BuildHer Collective.
So we sort of have clients in a whole range of different camps, and what most commonly we seem to work with people who are either just bought their first home and they've been saving and living in it for about 5 or 6 years and building up their capital to be ready to renovate, or they're buying something with the view to renovate. And then of course we have women and families who are in all the different other camps. But I suppose because Rebeka and I come from a commercial background, we've got experience in both sides of project management and construction management. We could see the problems that people were having. We wanted to put together a really clear course that we know from our experience can actually really help you overcome these issues. And it's really just for understanding of the process and the way the industry kind of works.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot involved, particularly in construction. And it's always good to particularly speak with women in construction, such as you guys. So your background is in construction management, isn't it?
Yeah, so mine is. So I was construction management. I went from quantity surveyor, which is the numbers, to builder, to project management, to on client side, and then to being a builder, which is where I met Kribashini as general manager of a building company. And that was a commercial building company. We left there and started residentially building, and now I'm a registered builder. So kind of seen that process, and I come at things really not from a builder's point of view, but from that kind of owner-builder, how to make it work, let's get to the finish line kind of building perspective, whereas Kribashini comes at it from the other perspective because she's been project managing and kind of guiding the client.
So it's a good mix, like you complement each other, where Rebeka, you have like the numbers background from the ground level with quantifying, and then yourself, Kribashini, where you're looking after the management side of it.
Yeah, so I've sort of worked on both sides of the coin as well, but more largely in the client side. And so I've sort of done the hard yards through the construction side, working your way up through contract admin and into project management, and then I decided to sort of jump back to client side, because for me it's probably the most fulfilling. You get to see the project from inception right through to completion, and you get to work with a client all the way through. And in that last role that I sort of had, I was the client as well as the project manager. So very similar to people who are developing their own properties or working on their own homes, because they're invested in the overall output, but they also need to be able to pull a whole lot of people together at the right time to pull it all, like to really get your project up and running. And I suppose if they miss a really crucial step at the beginning, they're already on the wrong pathway. And so we're really trying to help people put the right foot forward, I suppose, and pick the right pathway that meets their budget and meets their expectations and meets how they want to work with a builder. And I think that's where people go wrong, right at that very first step.
Now, like always on BuildHer, we always like to take it back to the beginning. So whereabouts did you guys grow up?
What do you
Yours
reckon?
is way more fun.
Well, so I'm South African, but I'm also a Kiwi, and I'm also Indian. So South African,
That's
Indian, immigrated
big makeup.
I know, right? It's very, very complicated in there.
Married to an Irishman living
Married
in
to an
Melbourne.
Irishman
Wow.
living in Melbourne. Yeah, we moved to New Zealand when I was little. I basically grew up Kiwi, and then about 10 years ago, I decided to move overseas. So I lived in Japan for a couple of years and then moved to Australia.
And what about you, Rebeka?
nothing particularly exciting. I grew
Boring,
up here,
Aussie, pure Aussie.
I guess, really, I grew up with, my parents have a carpet store. Like that, Jager's Carpets, go down there. But I grew up working on the floor and understanding what it was like to run a business. And I guess you've got a big sign behind you, hustle. The hustle that it is to continually keep quoting and doing jobs and working for people and understanding how much it means to them just to change one aspect of their home, let alone building. So I guess that work ethic and that kind of work through has always been the framework behind what we do. And actually BuildHer was created when Kribashini and I were on a holiday in Italy and probably had too much wine.
But we did go shopping.
We did go shopping. Yeah. But it was created because we were both saying, not complaining, but we were sharing the challenges that people were having. And I guess that's where you come at things and help builders, because you understand those challenges. We knew the challenges that women were having building because they were continually kind of coming to us and saying, we've got this problem, this problem, this problem. And you could see the full picture. I guess from your point of view, you look at things and go, well, the builder, I can understand how that management, don't you?
Yeah, look, it was the best thing that I ever did, becoming a lawyer, because I got to understand a different way of thinking. If I could pick a profession, like, if you had a family lawyer, right, they have a really tough gig. The stuff they see and hear and are involved in, now they're trained to think in a particular way, right? So they have, in a nutshell, they have so much energy towards the other person, right? So that lawyer's trained to think through the detail and just remove the emotion. I just remove the emotions. So some projects I'll be involved as an expert witness, where I'm an independent party. So I'll go to site if I'm on the builder side or I'm on the client side. It doesn't matter, but I'm independent, right? And then so where this has morphed into now is where I collaborate with a lot of lawyers as well as expert witness work. I do a lot of in-house work, and then through the podcast, I've just had multiple requests regularly to say, look, are you interested in coming and helping us? We need help. And so like construction law and is similar to a construction project, it's fairly niche, but there's so many different moving parts, so you can't sort of put a certain role on a certain project. Like, there's so many different pieces to the puzzle. At the end of the day, there's still no answer that fixes everything. It's just having the right attitude and adapting and being respectful and trying to understand people as much as possible.
So I like that you've got that framework behind you, that you're not just, you've been a builder, you've been a client, you understand those sides, and you can come at it from a perspective where you actually understand a lot more than people might anticipate. And then by being able to kind of jump up the line and do some of that work with the builders, you skip that process. So ideally you're saving them that, we don't know which ones are going to end up, in court or being messy, but you can get a fair sense at some point. And so by being able to jump in at that point and sort of mitigate those losses from the beginning means that everyone's getting a much better outcome, and they don't have to go through that really stressful, draining journey. And it's a journey that so many people hear about and what puts them off building.
When you've done a lot of projects, there's always a bad egg somewhere.
Yes.
There's always that one project that is going to go wrong in some way, and you just can't predict where it's going to go wrong. You can do everything right along the way and it can still get away from you. And we often talk about that with our members as well, is that you just need to be ready for that. One of the reasons that we were able to help those women who were coming to us is that we could take a step back and look at the whole process and say, well, this is actually where it went wrong and this is how you could have resolved that issue. And that comes from having done lots of projects and been through lots of different experiences, like you would be able to bring to the table as well, by seeing a whole lot of different issues arise and working through the resolution of a lot of different issues. Then you're bringing all that knowledge and experience to the next person, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, look, thank you. I'm extremely passionate about working with people behind the scenes. That's what I love, behind the scenes, and that's what this podcast sort of morphed into. It was so nowadays, it's 2020, so we have Instagram and Facebook and all the other social media channels. People get to see how their project's going and the development and the different stages. But not so long ago, you would really only see the completed project in an MBA award or a HIA award. But nowadays, everyone's exposed to so much information, so it can be information overload, really. So I just sort of set out to try and find out the real stories, what goes on in a project, what goes on with a particular builder, why they got into their respective industries. And one thing that I want to go back to, particularly with you, Rebeka, with quantifying and working as a quantity surveyor, because often you'll find, if I can pick on construction management, their first role is often as a contract administrator.
Yeah.
And that's such an important part of a project. But it has this stigma, like that's kind of the first job that you'll go into.
Passage.
Yeah, isn't it? It's so true, isn't it?
But yeah, I guess quantity surveying is basically working out what everything costs and going through it. I guess the good thing about that was that I got to work on so many different projects and got a really great understanding for design, cost, and how things got put together. Because as someone who's qualified, they've taught you stuff at uni, but you need to start seeing how things actually go together and what that looks like on site, and what little annotations on the drawings can have massive budget effects, and running that through. I mean, we had an issue with some windows, and it was just like we're building a 7-star, that BuildHer 8 project, 7-star energy rated project, and one of the little annotations on the windows and what that U value was meant that you could only use one specific glass, and there was a $34,000 cost saving by going back and forth to the consultants a few times. Now, how would you know to do that unless someone's come at you? Because that's a client. That's really for the client to do. The architect doesn't, like, they're not invested in that. That's just what it was. And so being able to work through these things and understand the full story of the project and implications. And I guess that's what we both really like, and why our different perspective on pretty much everything is really handy.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who come to us, they want to know roughly if what they're thinking to do matches their budget, and often it doesn't. But no one will tell them that. And so that's something that we'll look at and we go, well, within what we're seeing, we think these are the ranges. And it's pretty hard to give someone a number because they don't understand how much variation and how many different things feed into that number. So we try and educate a bit on that. They also want to know, like, is it the right idea or not before they engage any professionals, because every dollar counts when you've been saving up for years and then you don't know how to spend that wisely, and so it's really kind of a bit scary to start off. And I suppose the other big thing that they really have trouble with is, like, how long will it take, and can they live in it when they're doing it? And so answers to those sorts of questions are sort of the first building blocks of how to even plan your project. And I like to say it's project management by design. And, you plan your project, you design the execution of your project.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good analogy. Okay, so I have a feeling I know the answer to this question, but what is a typical design brief, or what would a typical brief look like, people approaching and reaching out to you guys at BuildHer Collective? So
when people come to us, generally they've got some questions. So we do like a free 20-minute consult, and we'll give them a broad understanding of where we think they're at, some people, and whether we think we can help them, whether they'd be a good fit. Some people, and this is kind of harsh, but some people aren't meant to build. Some people, it's going to be a really stressful process. They're going to take their family on that journey for 2 or 3 years, and it's not going to feel really nice. Those people should just buy a house that's finished and save themselves the time and the energy. But identifying that from the beginning is really tricky because it's going to take time. It's probably 15 hours a week, 5 to 15 hours a week for a period of time. Do you have that? Is the outcome, or is what you're trying to achieve worth it to you? So we have this kind of pretty in-depth, actually 20-minute conversation with someone, and then I guess for us it's about education. So you need to know a whole heap of stuff to be able to choose your pathway and understand. And no one is educating you. And so a lot of people will say, well, why didn't the builder tell me that? It's not actually his job.
Yep.
Why didn't the architect tell me? It's not really his job either. So it's no one's job. Yeah, well, it's no one's job.
Your job.
You know, well, it is because it's your project and you're invested in the outcome in a way that's different. So we have a course which helps people through that, and then we do kind of these Q&As or these sessions where people can bring where they're at and get that feedback straight away. Like, these are my plans. I want someone to look over it, or this is what I'm thinking to find an architect. Who would you recommend? Or this is the type of style, because of course there's different levels of trades and design professionals and people at each different level, and depending on what you're after, you're looking at a different level. And even understanding the fact that you can hire an architect for 20 grand to do your project, you can also hire one for 200 grand to do the exact same project, and they'll give a different thing, but what is it that's different? If you can't see it, you're just getting quotes.
That's
do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, look, it's the good old horses for courses. Like, there's different shoes, different boots for different settings. Like, it's the same sort of thing. There's different people for different projects, and there's different designers and architects, and there's so many different aspects and variables that suit each individual project. So what happens if I really want my project to go ahead and I'm not suitable? Can I sort of say, look, do you guys know someone, or do you have some people as part of your group that can say, look, I know such and such, they'll be able to help you get this project across the line?
Referrals.
Yeah.
Referrals is a big one. Do you want to cover this?
Well, we often try not to refer, actually, because we want to be independent, and part of being independent is having a fresh view. And what we teach is actually how to assess a quote, and how to assess apples for apples, and how to do a tender analysis, really. So we try not to give referrals, but within our members community, they do refer each other. So if someone is not a good fit for the course and for the program, we can let them know that there are builders who will, for example, do a turnkey project for them. And these are some names, but we don't really refer people.
So how long does the course go for, or do you have a couple of courses?
We have a few different courses, yeah. We've got a few little ones, like a kitchen and a bathroom, and then we have our flagship course, which is the Build Like a Builder program, and that's kind of delivered over 10 weeks, but it's a lifetime membership. So the reason we did that was actually kind of strategic. We don't want to push people down a funnel and say you have to learn everything in this 10 weeks, because as women, we know life happens, babies happen, you know, jobs get lost, and often the renovation journey is a long one. So we have a sort of a lifetime membership for our members so that they're supported that whole way through. And people will start and then they'll forget about it for a few months, or they'll take a break from it and they'll come back. And so it's nice that we can be there through that whole journey with them. And they have that, they have that support network of the other builders and developers to ask questions and get recommendations and say, oh, I love this tile, where was it from? Or should I go blue, or should I go green? And, it's just bouncing ideas off people that are also interested in renovating and building and are doing it themselves and have that tangible, practical advice that they can share. And maybe
it's also
talk about
kind of different in terms of the different ways you learn. And I mean, I'm going to guess that you would start at the beginning and go through, whereas I like to jump around where I want to, like, what the information I like.
Yeah.
And it's okay for people to kind of do what they want, or some people don't want to do that. They kind of have an understanding of that and they'll want to come along to the Q&As and just use us as a sounding board. And we've got a trade discount list as well. So we allow people to buy at builders' rates. So there are accounts that, it started up with accounts that I'd set up as a builder to do jobs, and I'm like, oh, we'll just go here and use this account, and you can get a discount rate. And now we've got suppliers, all over the place, and we've got a great buying group actually.
Yeah, great.
So they can then go kind of get their quotes and get that builder's rate. So if they want to put it in or substitute something, they understand what those costs are. Some of our builders like to finish a project. Some of them like to work with a builder in varied, blended ways. And others just want to, a turnkey where they go, okay, here you go. I'm going to tend to this professionally and understand what I'm buying from the builder and the process to run through that, and they won't get involved in that same level.
We've been working on our book for like the last year, which we forget to tell people about. And so this book is really stepping out a little bit and giving some insights into that process, but providing a lot of inspiration along the way. And if people are thinking about it, because we know they think about it for years before they're ready to take that first step. And often people put a barrier, right? So I'm not thinking about my renovation until I have X amount of dollars. Or I am thinking about it, but I'm not going to hire a builder or talk to anyone about it until I have X amount of dollars or we have the right house. And actually, that's not a great way to think about it, because I think that being in our community and being involved and seeing what people are doing before you're starting is one of the best gifts you can give to yourself, because you just absorb and learn so much more by doing that. But this book is also really interesting in a way of breaking down some of those processes and really sort of helping you get your head around what's ahead of you.
I like that. So what's the book title?
Yes, it's BuildHer, a practical guide to building. We've only it's been sent to the print house today.
That's
and
exciting.
it's a lovely coffee table book. So I guess it's not super heavy and kind of self-published and like read through all this text. It's like these are why we're doing things. And there's a lot of tips in there and information about what you can, I guess, how to guide that process for your home without making it super tricky or challenging.
Yeah, look, I love that, because as we keep saying, and it's the theme of this podcast, if you can at least mitigate that risk and know 80%, 90% if you're very, very lucky of how to manage a project all the way down to dealing and liaising with the builder and the trades, it will save a lot of hassle and heartache.
Yeah, I agree. Understanding, simple things like the Australian standards, what standard is actually acceptable, can be a saving grace on your relationship with the builder, as well as understanding because people have this kind of they have this car finish type thought, because when we look at the photos, they're all airbrushed and staged to a inch of their life, and that's not building. Building is imperfect. And so we see a lot of relationships, I guess, fall down at the very end, like what they would get from a car showroom, where you're getting this kind of material line and you're rolling out the same product each time. Well, every house is different, and you're getting a unique set of materials which are kind of cobbled together in a unique way, with always different trades and different client and architect, everyone coming together. Like, we are both big fans of education and growth and business groups and things like that, because there's no one to keep you accountable or to give you guidance when things, often it's just a niggling feeling, and you feel like it's going to go wrong, and it can go wrong. But if you can get a solution to it at that point, everything can be a lot better. And it can be even just running over the financials and saying, do you see any holes here? How should this look? How much should I be spending here? What are the different packages that are being released that I can use to manage my sites and my trades? Like, all of this information, you don't get it from anywhere unless you go seek it.
I call it strategizing. And how many people are there out there that talk about, when I was building a long time ago, I would go see my accountant and lawyer. I still didn't feel like it was a customised, specific strategy for my business. So seeing an accountant, they say, how can I make money? Yeah. Increase your turnover. Well, it's not just increasing turnover, because with that comes a whole heap of other problems, supervision and expense and things like that.
It's definitely a sweet spot.
Yeah, and that's right. And then you go see a lawyer. Well, the only time you go see a lawyer usually is if you're acquiring a site or you're in trouble in our industry. So whereas a lot of the problems that we experience day to day in construction land is a strategy. It's not like a hard and fast rule that you can read on a YouTube channel or hear about on a podcast. There's no manual for it. It's about strategizing and saying, look, I have these problems, or I have this client problems, or I'm struggling with this site. I've lost money. How can I get it back on track? It's a very customized and specific strategy that I think the industry needs.
We do that with the Developing for Profit. So we've got a group of women that are all renovating and developing for profit, and we've got the structure of the course to teach them how to do that. But each month we go in and we speak to someone who is actually developing for profit, and they've all got a sweet spot. They've all got an edge and a way they play the game, and we speak to them and kind of draw that out. And then we look at, sometimes we look at the feasibility, the numbers of how that's working. because we can all learn from how someone else is doing it. And by seeing across so many different pathways, but no one wants to share that information. And for one person to go out and say, okay, I'm going to speak to you, and then I'm going to spend my time speaking to this person, then I'm going to try and work out what they're doing, it would be too much. So by kind of centralising that, we can all learn, and then we all share amongst ourselves, and I guess really have that kind of the strategy, the input, and shared learnings and confidence for someone to say, oh, well, actually, you might not have considered the civil work that's going to be required in this. So it looks good, but
Always
have you
underlooked.
allowed this much? And I guess that's super important.
Yeah, and it's also about sharing knowledge. So little things like saying, well, I just did a project in that area and the big thing was tree removal and off-street car parking. Or looking at a feasibility and saying, actually, you haven't allowed, like your square metre rate is totally off the charts. Have you actually verified with any builders or sanity checked with anyone? So it's about, I suppose, that in some way looking at the strategy and saying, well, we're looking at it over everything.
So you're able to steer them and oversee their project.
Yeah, and there's different experts in there. So you've got people doing their first project and they're doing their family home, and then you've got other people that are managing 8 to 10, townhouse developments on the books, and how they tie in their businesses and the financials and how to make it all work. We've got people in there that are lots of wives of builders and architects. I mean, wife of builders are amazing for this type of thing because you've got the skill to be able to get, a well-costed product. And then you've got that person to be able to spend the time doing that bookwork and that strategy and that research that goes in. Selling a house is a really emotional thing. So there's a whole process around branding that, doing the socials, being able to sell it, and kind of having that value at the highest level.
I think also we want to put out good homes, right? So we want a good product out there, and I think that's the key difference is we don't think developing is a dirty word or being a developer is a dirty word. We made our own word, developer. But being a developer is about creating a great space and a home that someone wants to live in that actually speaks to their values and speaks the way that we need a home to work and flow, and it makes people happy to be in those homes. And I think that's what it's also about. It's that difference. It's that having a point of difference, having a value drive, being engaged in it. And I think that it's all for me, it's all kind of coming together into the one big melting pot.
Yeah, look, I was having this conversation the other week about this, and I had the guys on a couple of weeks ago from Urban & Co in Sydney, and these guys work right from day one. So it may be a case of the client acquires a site all the way through to handing over the keys. And we were having a bit of a running joke because their clients sometimes are their second or third project. They have learnt from the first project of what not to do, even if that includes never manage a project, because you mentioned it, there's so many pieces of the puzzle that go into building. It's impossible to be a guru at it. I mean, how often do you hear trades that, or a builder even, who may be recommended for one project, and then you get the story from the next project to say, I don't know what you were thinking with that guy, he didn't do a good job.
But then you bring in different people together as
Correct.
well, and I guess this is
There's
where
dynamics.
your background comes in. Who's a good fit for me? Like Kribashini and I, we have really different personality, and the person who works well for me is not necessarily going to work well for Kribashini. So I'm going, oh, you're my mate. I've had a great experience with this builder. They'll take over and do your job for you. And they're like, I can't work with her. And she's like, this guy's not listening to me, because they don't speak the same language and they haven't been primed from the beginning to how to go about it.
Well, and then the clients themselves don't understand the nuances of the different models and why in one your architect might do a certain amount of work for you and in the other you're having to pick up a lot of the pieces. So they think, and everything comes down to frustration. When you don't know you're supposed to do something and then you have to do it, people get frustrated. And builders get frustrated on the same coin because it's not their job to educate their client, but they are having to do that because there's actually nowhere you can go that really spells it out for everyone, and there's nowhere where you can go that says you do this and then you do this and then you do this, because it's so complicated. And that's really what we tried to solve with BuildHer Collective, is really based on our understanding and our experiences, really pull it together and say, well, if you do this, you go that way. And if you do this, you go that way. And most commonly we hear that a client has hired an architect, for example, without understanding that that architect is giving them a full set of documentation, which means they have to go out to tender, but they don't know how to do that. And so we understand that would be really scary and a really frustrating time if you don't know what you're doing.
Or they've got a set budget and it escapes from them because they don't understand what's inside the budget, what's outside the budget. The architect said I can do it for this amount, but they're not understanding that all those fees and charges are on top of that, and the architect doesn't necessarily, sometimes they do, but doesn't necessarily have a direct link with a builder who's checking what they're asking for, and every time they ask for something, it adds more money to the budget, but they're not understanding that they need to readjust what their budget is along the way. So it's very complex. I would also like to frame kind of where you come from and why we were talking about it, and kind of having that conversation of like we were talking about from the builder's point of view, how that went. Can you kind of go into a little bit of I know you've been a builder, you're a building lawyer, you consult for people, you consult on the builder's side and the client side, so you mesh that together as well.
Yeah, look, as you said, it's extremely complicated and you're often dealing with emotions and personalities. So on one side of the fence, you may have a challenging site or a complicated design. So that's sort of one aspect that you can control. The site, as I mentioned, you can control that. The funds, you have certain limited control on that. What you don't have control on in many circumstances is the people behind, the personalities. We talked about it before. You can have a really good builder or a really good tradesman on a particular site and they don't perform on another site. So it's just a constantly revolving door. It never ever gets perfect. And that frustrates me because when I was building, you're always trying to perfect things. You never get there. Some things are your fault, some things are not your fault. And when you try and put it into the big pot and give it a stir, sometimes it just doesn't come out right. And so it's extremely challenging. That's where it comes down to relationships. It comes down to fundamentals and people trying to do the right thing. Now, you can have all that. All it takes is one client and they're hell-bent on a certain project falling under a certain budget. That creates tension. So you can have the design right, the people right, but all of a sudden you've thrown in this budget constraint and they're stretched to their limits and you're suddenly, through no fault of your own, growing that and increasing the cost. That creates tension and creates a lot of problems. Then you may have a builder or a tradesman on the other side who they have cash flow concerns or they have family issues, all these sorts of different things, completely external to the project, but throw them into the pot, it just creates tension and that leads to another thing. So it's a challenge.
And I guess from the kind of perspective of everyone, you're in there at one of the most stressful points of time is building. You're managing large amounts of money. There's a lot of emotional weight on this money and getting the outcome and what that means for your family. And then you've got this relationship with someone that often you've chosen because they've delivered the cheapest price. And you haven't necessarily vetted them for, do I want to kind of work with this person for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? Same as the architect, right? So I've seen a project they like, I'm going to engage them because I think they can do the right job, or I've looked at the quotes that have come in and I've decided you're going to do it. But you don't have certainty over that outcome from the onset. So that relationship needs to work together to deliver the project from everyone's perspective. But not everyone's capable of doing that. Not everyone deals with stress. And where I am now might be different to in a year's time. You know, like certainly for anyone who signed a contract in January of this year, and this year's kind of COVID year, the impact of COVID on all those relationships financially, how you get people on site, what the turnaround times and lead times of materials are, everything has been affected, and that's not predictable when you're signing.
One of the things that we included in our program is a fortnightly Q&A, and we did that for the reason of we realised that issues crop up in building and that building it's not neat. You can't just package it into a nice little 10-week course and then say, here's everything you need to know, go away and do it. Things come up that you don't know how to deal with, and because there's personalities and there's emotions and there's big budgets, you need to be able to know how to workshop those. And so we do this Q&A with our members every 2 weeks. And they can come along and ask any question and we'll do our best to answer it. And a few concepts that always come up is probably this idea of bringing your baggage to a disagreement. And we try and talk to our members about understanding that you can't bring every little thing. When there's an issue that's arisen on site, you can't bring the baggage of every other little thing that's cropped up to this one debate. You need to be able to look at something in isolation and look at it for the facts. And also take the emotion out of it.
That's a difficult thing to do, isn't it?
It's so hard because they sometimes they bring their baggage that had nothing to do with this builder. It can be, we've been going through this process with our architect for 10 years. And now we've finally got to the point and now there's an issue that's arisen on site and it's not actually anyone's fault. It's just happened. And so how do you work through that? And one of the other ones that came to mind when you were talking was contingency planning. So we do a lot of work with our members to talk to them about contingency planning and understanding how to plan, how to budget for contingency and what types of things do crop up in construction that you should be aware of that can cost extra money so that those tensions can be reduced if you're aware that they may happen.
So how do you do that? Do you apply a contingency percentage to the overall project?
Yeah, so we have some spreadsheets that we share with people and they have some contingency budget allowances or percentages. But we also talk about how you can look at the risks on your site and you can allocate a contingency for a particular risk. So if you know you've got bad soil, you can allocate a little bit extra. If you know you're going to make some extra changes or there might be an issue with materials, you can actually contingency plan for that. And there's a theory and there's calculations that run behind that. But for a basic renovation, you can mostly identify when you have all the information in front of you how much your contingency should lie as you're going through the process. It's really interesting that those issues come up from both sides. And on the builder side, whether you're hiring a builder or whether you're managing trades directly, you just need to know a little bit more about what could pop up.
Yeah, look, as part of what I do for builders is I'll do a lot of in-house work where I'll be running like a tender workshop. Okay, so for
fantastic.
A particular larger project, like call it say $4 million project, there's a lot of challenges that are part of that project, not just feasibility and financially, but also on site.
Yep.
So what I've found through my work is sometimes when a builder puts in a tender for a particular project, the first time that their team of employees or subbies enter that site is on day one. Or it might be one particular trade might be 90 days down the track. So it makes sense to avoid all these unforeseens. I mean, you can't avoid all of them, but just to try and mitigate the risk is to have a bit of a workshop.
Yep.
I like what you're doing. You're talking about a Q&A session. So we'll run a workshop, a bit like this environment, good old whiteboard, and identify the risks of the project. It could be a highly aggravated neighbour that's going to make the process entirely complicated the whole way through.
Yeah,
and that costs a lot.
Rebeka's had a few of those.
If you don't control that or at least mitigate it by knowing how do you deal with that neighbour, what are his or her rights in this process, by knowing that process and knowing where you sit, you're able to say, well, look, these are his rights. He can stand there all he likes. He can say, well, I'm not going to react to that. So that's one aspect. You may have a challenging site with asbestos material that's been picked up in the geotech report. There's certain challenges that go along with that. And then it could be as simple as having an experienced foreman in the room by saying, look, there's a fair bit of structural steel in this one, or there's some suspended concrete floors. We're going to need this, or we're not going to be able to have everyone on site during this process. So that all of a sudden starts to mitigate the risk and basically put more control in your pocket. Now, there's an opportunity to combine that and have not just the builder in that tender workshop, but also the client as well.
Absolutely.
So it's about having those early conversations, I think, is the key message.
I think that's fantastic.
But a builder gets left on their own a lot, right? And so there are some of their learnings, and everyone's learnings are slightly different and their experience is different. So if you take a builder that's been building, they could have been building for 20 years, but they might have just been doing extensions or new builds with no underground basements, and then you give them an underground basement. Who do they go to for extra support and programming? So they'll do their research and they understand the principles behind it, but you learn something every time you build. So by coming in there and doing a workshop with them and being available to kind of workshop, okay, well, these are our programming things. We know we're going to have a wet basement, so we get water in here. We know it's going to be tricky to structure because of this, or we're going to have some road management issues, or we've seen some rock on a different site. You're able to kind of help them from their side, but also on the perspective that no one can know everything. You know, everything is going to be slightly different, but by being able to bring a client in at some point, probably not if that's the situation at that point.
Pretender.
Haven't done this before.
Is there any extra money in the budget? But by
bringing them on board at some point and having a good conversation about this is the way it's going to work, you've also set them up with some level of understanding, because always it comes down to trust as well, right? So the client needs to trust that the builder is able to deliver and go along the process. And sometimes builders allow too much access for a client, and so that means the client will come on board and they'll walk through the site and go, oh, is that meant to be like that? Is that meant to be like that? And the builder's hearing criticism, and they're like, yeah, that is what it's meant to be like, but this space isn't finished, and when it's finished it'll look right, but there's a process to get there. So sometimes the systems that are set up from the beginning need to be better controlled. Do you help builders set those systems up to work with their clients as well?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So you mentioned then communication, and one of the issues I sort of find myself working through with builders is they don't apply a unique perspective to managing that particular client. They don't look at it, what that person does. They don't gauge enough detail on what rubs that client up the wrong way, what ticks the boxes with that client, what does he or she like. So you kind of have to apply a broad spectrum to each, just like you do with each project. You also have to do the same thing with the client. So, for example, I have one particular builder that I work with where they had a client who, if I could put it lightly, was a control freak, right? So this client was wanting daily video shots of this particular project, as well as photos, which photos I can understand, but going around and filming different things and then speaking to that client every single day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day, that's taking that builder off that job. Like his level of focus and detail now rests up the food channel, not down where it should be. Basically, in that particular case, I just said, look, this communication needs to stop. It's too much. We need to pull it back. We'll have one weekly in-person site meeting, and that's it. The odd emails and phone calls for clarifying things, no problems, right? But the actual detailed analysis of what's going on, feeding that back up to the client, it was affecting the builder's concentration and level of detail. So I just said, look, you need to push back. Tell it how it is. Just say, look, I can't manage this project and build this project to the detail that you want me to if I'm constantly worried about you breathing over my shoulder all the time. So let's go back to once a week on-site meetings. Don't worry about the phone and email, on-site meetings. Yeah. So that just straight away took the tension off the builder. I don't know how the client liked it, but by all reports, that project went so much better after that than how it was, which was full of tension, frustration. It was too much. So
you can kind of go in for any builder and troubleshoot specific problems and help them sort of navigate a way through it and sort of mediate a solution.
Yeah,
That's
so
fantastic.
I collaborate with a lot of lawyers, right? And we talk about this all the time. From our perspective, disputes arise out of frustration, but usually a dispute that forms into a contractual dispute or a financial dispute, that result is an outcome of something going back to some particular event or incident, right?
Absolutely.
That's usually the case. So from the client's perspective, they're trying to reduce their damage. It becomes a financial dispute. So they'll then say, well, look, we have building defects, which is a common way of quantifying the damage that they have suffered. And then a builder on the other side is not getting paid.
I think it's such a fantastic service to offer builders, particularly builders coming up in the trade. And the reason I wanted to touch back on that point is it's so valuable because A lot of the times the bigger commercial builders, they have project managers and construction managers who have seen a lot, who've worked on a lot of different projects, and often they will have a pre-tender session, and they will have basically a risk management session where they pull in everyone who's relevant, and they'll go through and they go, right, have we allowed enough of this? Have we thought about this? Have we done this? And for you to be able to offer that service to builders who don't have that level of resourcing in their companies, or they're young builders who are coming up the chain, or they're small companies, it would be a fantastic benefit to them. And I think one of the things that which I think could be controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Go for it.
I just think that the residential construction industry has so much to learn from the commercial construction industry in terms of how to do things better, how to manage projects better, how to be a little bit more risk adverse, how to protect themselves a little bit better. And if the two industries could actually get together and share those skills, I think it'd be better for everyone's clients included, buyers, tradies, small builders, new builders, newly registered builders. I think that there's so much to learn from everyone. And, you know, in bigger projects, it does happen a lot. It's just not really filtering down, I think.
Yeah, look, I actually don't think it's controversial at all. And actually, I agree with you, because the issue you see with, say, a difference between a commercial site and a residential site, you may have a formwork carpenter, for example, on a commercial site. He's very good at certain things, putting together columns, slabs, things like that. But he might struggle to do residential construction. Absolutely. And the challenges that exist on that. And then vice versa, you have builders. I mean, some of the builders I've seen who, to make a step from residential up to commercial, it's another ball game.
Yep.
You have to increase your standards. You have to have extra quality management controls, environmental management controls. So putting together these policies and procedures, managing your site with day-to-day challenges. We've just gone through 2020 with COVID, and that's presented a challenge on its own. Those challenges with site registers and things like that go by the wayside on some residential sites, they are paramount on commercial sites. So from the ground up, literally, there are so many extra challenges that exist from making that step.
And I agree with you, vice versa, because I was working on commercial, and we started BuildHer, and now I'm learning a lot more about residential, and little things like, in a commercial building we need to have this, and this, and Rebecca's like, no, in the residential we don't need to have that. And so even for me, it's like, okay, I've got to relearn this, and it's not that you don't know, it's just they're different.
Well, different on all aspects, because there's this expectation that in building is true, but like residential building is really tricky for people. And it's tricky because they take the commercial expectations and they take expectations from the real world, like, I've arranged this person to come meet me on site at 7 o'clock in the morning, they're going to turn up, and I didn't have to phone them 15 times to make sure they were going to be there. And they apply it to domestic, and they're like, the guy didn't turn up. And I'm like, yep. Well, that's going to happen. They came and they looked at the site and then they didn't submit a quote. And I'm like, yeah, because they're really busy. And for them, the time that they're spending on their tools is split with the paperwork. And a lot of the people who are on the tools, the paperwork isn't the skill set that they are best at or they enjoy the most, so they don't do it, and no one's checking, or the compliance levels are pretty low. And most of the builders domestically, or a lot of them, have come from that old, I was a carpenter and I can build a house, so I'm going to move up that line. So those things that we're expecting commercially are very different. Whereas in a commercial framework, we've got people that are trained and they've got university level, they're good at the paperwork, they understand how to get it done. It's a lot quicker for them to do a lot of this stuff than maybe it is someone who it's not innately a skill that they're very good at. So you've got to kind of understand the perspective around it when you then start to look at building and engaging someone. What am I hiring, and what can I backfill to make this process easier as a client? If money's that outcome and you've got a fixed constraint and you want to manage, you can step in and help guide these things. So those weekly meetings that you were talking about that you're saying BuildHer put in place, we're actually teaching the same thing, but we're saying, client, put this in place with your builder because you can keep them on track, because often the constraints that we're finding from the builder is the client is they're going, oh, the builder asked me to have the toilet on site tomorrow, so I've got to drop everything, go find a toilet. An ideal world, yeah, everything's selected ahead of time, but we know that doesn't actually happen. So by having these weekly meetings, we can frame, okay, what's coming up ahead? What do I need to get organised? What framework and time and programming are you doing? And then everyone's accountable at the one meeting, and you're covering off so many more conversations than those Sunday night emails, and everyone knows we all read into emails differently.
Correct.
And we speak to people
Especially
differently on emails than we do. And so then that frustration's coming out in the emails, whereas it's a meeting, it's a lot nicer.
You know, I think a great example of that, we're running a development with, we're bringing 6 other women through, like an internship into building and construction. And one of the conversations came through one of our members to say we were getting a fence quote, and she said she'd emailed him and she'd spoken to him on the phone, but he hadn't returned her email. And it was about 2 weeks, I think. So she said, well, he must not want the job. And we were like, well, actually, no, he's probably just really busy on the tools because he's on the tools 9 to 5 or, 7 to 4, and he hasn't had a chance to respond to the email yet. So don't discount him too soon. And so there's this fine balance of understanding the way that the industry works so you can get the best out of it, and accepting certain things, but also knowing when to ask for something and how long is appropriate to wait.
Yeah, look, I really like what you were just talking about, and having that understanding of that day-to-day relationship of what that builder or trade's doing, and being accepting that that particular trade hasn't put the quote in or hasn't gotten back, and understanding that the day in the life of a trade, because it's extremely hard. I see it on Instagram all the time where a particular apprentice has come on as a mature age apprentice. They don't like their Monday to Friday boring office job. They love this tradie life, and so they're enjoying it, working out in the in the weather. So they're on the tools. It's a physical job. So getting home at night and putting together a quote is not always their number one priority in life, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to fathom, isn't it?
Like, I know if I was on the tools all day, I don't want to come home and then get in front of the computer and work on a quote.
But I guess that's kind of the understanding also the framework and how often you've got to call someone, and having that system in place. If I spoke to my concreter and I say, okay, I'm going to book you in for 2 weeks' time on the 2nd. If I just leave it till the 2nd, it may or may not be 2 weeks' time. I actually don't know where the date is. But if I just leave it till then and wait for him to turn up, that's not going to happen.
That's right.
He isn't remembered. There's no system and framework, and there's no accountability. So, and as a client, you might be one-off job. He's never going to see or hear from you again. So where's his real incentive to kind of level up for you?
And I think also being working on a construction site is so foreign to so many people, particularly women. They just don't get the insight into that. And unfortunately, a lot of women are left to do a lot of the organising when it comes to renovating or building in your own home. And so that's partly what we wanted to overcome, is give them those insights into how that industry works. And I think people forget too that trades work 6 days a week. And there's really only one day off, and then so where's time for family and life? And a lot of us are in our 9 to 5, Monday to Friday jobs, and so we think that there's time for things. So I think understanding is the first step to reducing the amount of frustration that's going to happen. There is a reason to bring out a contract at the end of the project. It's happened months ago, or it's been a steady roll of a lot of things.
That's right. Yeah, look, I think it's a wonderful thing you guys are doing, and I think anything that's inspiring women to get into building and construction and create a little community and a group, I think it's really inspiring and excellent. So well done. I think it's a really good thing for the industry. So it's really exciting to see what you guys are doing in future, and I really appreciate you guys coming on to BuildHer.
Hello so much for having us.
Well, that was another BuildHer episode with Rebeka and Kribashini from BuildHer Collective. What an inspiring group of women, and I certainly encourage you to check out their socials, as these guys are an absolute powerhouse doing incredible and exciting things in the construction space. Like I said, they're absolutely leading the charge. As usual, please check out our Instagram page and other socials, where you'll be able to learn more about our guests and some of the features of the projects that we talk about. Have a great week, and you'll hear me again on the airwaves next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of BuildHer.
You have experienced a BuildHer developed production.